Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
3, Romeo, 2, 4,
Hello and welcome to another special panel episode of Lux Occult. This is, of course, the podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and also discuss a variety of occult, spiritual, esoteric, and adjacent topics. Exploring the intersections of magic, science, art, philosophy, technology, and so much more through the lens of chaos magic, it's occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice right now, that means that this show, and magic for that matter, are for you if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in the world, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life in an accountable way can be one of these ways to be more free. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself. People can, will, and should disagree sometimes with the things that I or my guests say on this show. How would we ever learn anything if we were all in agreement on all things at all times after all? Unlike those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I can and often will revise my opinions and thoughts about things based on new evidence. All right, very excited to share another installment from the Magic and Mental Health panel discussion series. This one on the topic of boundaries and psychic self-defense. This is part 2 of a 2-part episode, so check out the last installment with Zarpala Claudius and the Tom O. Bedlam if you haven't already. Because of how timing and how people's schedules worked out, it was necessary to record in several different sessions. For today's double-header episode, we're going to hear from Catalyst as well as Lonnie Scott of the Weird Web Radio podcast, both of whom will be addressing the following questions. How do we define and delineate boundaries in our magical work and interpersonal lives? Are there intersections between how we protect ourselves from potentially unhelpful magical forces and potentially unhelpful people? What are some experiences in this area others might find useful to hear about? And how do we define psychic self-defense? How do we practice it? What are some experiences or tips we'd share there? So I'm very grateful to everybody who was so generous with their time and perspectives in volunteering to join our peer-to-peer discussions. Thanks so much to all of the panelists who have helped to make our magic and mental health discussion series such a success. Some important context to understand about all of the magic and mental health discussions is that the people you're going to be hearing from are not mental health care practitioners and are speaking about their own lives and their own experiences. So although you might find some useful things in our discussions, none of it is meant to be advice about what might work for you in particular. We're all coming from different situations and have different context and things like that. So please keep all of this in mind and take whatever you find useful and leave the rest behind. Reflecting back on the last episode, which was the first half of the discussion about boundaries and psychic self-defense, I thought it would be useful here to offer some definitions of boundaries and some other ideas that are from a short book called Unfuck Your Boundaries, Build Better Relationships Through Consent, Communication, and Expressing Your Needs by Dr. Faith G. Harper. This is available from Microcosm Publishing. It's an easy read that I found super useful in understanding what boundaries sort of like even were when I first started talking about this stuff and like thinking about it in therapy a little while back. A lot of people don't come from context where we're really like taught what healthy personal boundaries look like or how to assert and maintain them for ourselves, especially in a culture that often sort of like wants us to do what we're told. I don't know, like buy a thing or whatever, even though it might not be in our best interest to do so. Okay, so here are some kind of little paraphrased definitions from Unfuck Your Boundaries. Boundaries are essential building blocks of relationships and personhood and make up the structure of how we live and how we move in the world. So understanding boundaries is fundamental and information that all humans need to know. Boundaries define our personal space, our time, our values, our limits and relationships and jobs and society in general. They are rules of engagement that allow us to make choices and act in the world while maintaining our sense of self. Understanding and having healthy boundaries is crucial for personal growth, self-respect, and fostering meaningful relationships with others. Understanding, recognizing, and being respectful of boundaries isn't only about personal growth or well-being, it's also a matter of social justice and interpersonal effectiveness. People who lack boundaries become malleable and controllable, which can lead them to being exploited and abused, or being complicit in the exploitation and abuse of others. By establishing and maintaining clear and healthy boundaries, we assert our personhood and contribute to creating a culture of mutual respect and consent by modeling that behavior for others. Society often devalues discussions about boundaries or misinterprets or misrepresents what they are, making it difficult for individuals to recognize and assert their personal boundaries. This societal dismissal can lead to a culture where boundary violations are normalized, overlooked, or even encouraged. Okay, thank you to Dr. Faith G. Harper for the book Unfuck Your Boundaries, which I highly recommend. Situations where boundary violations are normalized or overlooked certainly seem like something that a lot of us have observed in different areas of our life and different contexts, including perhaps at work or at home, or in the broader context of society and political life. The idea of having a Bill of Rights as part of the Constitution of the U.S. is a sort of contract between the state and the people about boundaries. And this is sort of assertion that the state needs to protect and respect the boundaries of we the people, as it's phrased. So negotiations about boundaries can be fraught and complicated. In discussions about boundaries, I've actually heard it said that if one's boundaries are never causing some degree of conflict or they never upset anybody in your life, then they might not be working or they might not be there at all. Complicating the issue further is it's also sometimes unfortunately the case that people who are manipulative or abusive can sometimes use the language of therapy or maybe misunderstand or misrepresent some of the concepts that one might encounter in therapy and use things like supposed personal boundaries as a means of controlling or coercing others into doing things. A sort of cultural touchstone here that I'm thinking of is, I think a couple years back, I think this is back in 2023, there was this movie guy who was dating a surfer lady, and he got super mad when she was surfing with dudes and posting pictures of herself in a bathing suit, and he said it was violating his personal boundaries for her to do that, and people sort of rightly pointed out that her doing her job and posting pictures of herself on her own social media accounts didn't really have any impact on his personhood and couldn't necessarily constitute a boundary violation. It was a whole discussion a few years back. As you might be able to tell by my little summary there, I'm not great at keeping up with celebrity gossip or pop culture news or things like that, or even knowing who famous people are a lot of the time, which I'm okay with. I did feel a little bit guilty about that lackluster reporting, though, so we're going to come back to the story of the movie dude and the surfer lady later during a break, and there's going to be a little bit more discussions about boundaries there that I found. I think it's kind of interesting stuff. We're going to be hearing from Catalyst first, who brings up the distinction between boundaries and rules that people in polyamorous spaces often discuss, which I think is sort of relevant to the story of the movie dude and the surfer lady as well. So with Catalyst, we're going to be getting into chaos magic and the models of magic, Bruce Lee and martial arts, and also into some of Catalyst's own praxis for psychic self-defense and much more. But first, let me remind you that if you like the show and the other work I've been getting into, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me. There are no tiers or levels or whatever, so give as you will. Buy Me a Coffee is an option for those who wish to show their support with a one-time donation. Thank you so much to everybody who is already doing so. Your support makes it possible to make this show by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with production and whatnot, thereby allowing me to justify to myself the time that I spend. Although I'm an extremely introverted person and I don't really use social media very much for this reason, I'm not there checking on stuff every day or anything like that. This certainly doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from you all. I'm beyond lucky to have such amazing listeners, collaborators, cohorts, co-conspirators, etc. Y'all are very cool. Fuck yeah. I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, or arcane revelations for the listener mailbag segment. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod, where I'm not posting very much, but you can still direct message me. Or you can find me on Blue Sky at luxestrada919. All right, fuck yeah. Without further ado, let's hop into this first segment of this doubleheader episode and hear from Catalyst about boundaries and psychic self-defense. All right, well, my guest for this portion of the panel on psychic self-defense and boundaries is Catalyst. Catalyst, welcome.
Hi, hello.
Thank you so much for joining me. And if you wouldn't mind giving myself and the listeners whatever context about yourself you would like us to have.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Yeah, so I go by Catalyst in a number of different realms, I guess. And I have been practicing magic consciously and intentionally since, I'm going to say I was about 20 or 21, and I'm in my mid-40s now, so had a bit of time with it. I've explored many different paths. I've studied with a couple of modern mystery schools, and essentially, when I found chaos magic in the early 2000s, it really resonated for me because it was essentially doing what I was already doing, which was trying out a bunch of stuff and then grabbing the things that made sense and worked for me and pulling it all together into a personal system. And so, yeah, that's kind of been my experience with magic. Beyond that, I'm Freemason, I'm polyamorous, I am kinky, I do all kinds of fun things. ADHD to the max. So feel free to help keep me focused on the question if I wander too far.
Kink Mason, I'm thinking of all the fun things you could build. Sorry.
Yeah. Unfortunately, none of the guys in my lodge are anywhere near as fun as I am.
Well, that's disappointing. All right, well, we're not here to talk about that, unfortunately, although we could.
Yeah.
But the questions that we are posing to the panel today are, how do we define and delineate boundaries in our magical work and in our interpersonal lives? Is there intersection between how you protect yourself from potentially unhelpful magical forces and potentially unhelpful people? And what are some experiences in that area that might be useful to hear about? And then sort of on the psychic self-defense tip of things, how do we define psychic self-defense and how do we practice it? And what are some experiences? So these things might be related. They might be like different things for different people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, one of the conversations in the ethical non-monogamy space is around boundaries versus rules. And of course, this is an ongoing, never-ending conversation, but I feel like it applies here a little bit because when we talk about boundaries and delineations in our magical work or in our interpersonal lives, like, how do we define a boundary, right? To me, a boundary is, this is something that I will tolerate or this is something I will not tolerate. And if it's something I will not tolerate, there is a specific set of actions or a response that will come from me if that boundary is crossed. And I think all of us have some of these boundaries, whether they're conscious or not. So for example, for most of us who are raised in North America or who grew up in North American culture, we have a certain fairly defined personal space boundary. And that's a little bit porous. If you live in really crowded cities, you're used to having people a little closer to you than if you live in rural areas, for example, where we're used to having lots of space. And so if someone steps intentionally into your personal space and it's someone you are comfortable with, you will stay there. You wouldn't necessarily move or step back or whatever because you're comfortable with that person in your space. But with a stranger, you probably have a boundary of, this is as close as I'm willing to let a stranger get before I feel defensive, before I will automatically step backwards, before I will do something to shield myself from this person because I don't know what their intention is, right? And so that stepping back, that's the consequence of the boundary being overstepped, right? And so the same thing to me, whether it's in personal or in the magical realms, is most of it is things that I've consciously thought through and said, okay, like, based on my experiences, this is something I'm willing to accept. This is something I'm not willing to accept. And I have those pre-examined and pre-thought through responses to what am I going to do if this boundary is crossed. And then, of course, there are those automatic ones, those ones that we just don't even think about because they're so built into us, which, again, in quote unquote real world, stepping back when someone gets too close would be the same in the magical realms, where I would immediately invoke a layer of protection or one of my layers of shields. For example, if some kind of energy was coming on too hard or too strong before I felt comfortable with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. Yeah, I think that we do have these kind of like instinctive reactions that sometimes we're kind of like trained by culture or society or whatever to like not follow too, which is interesting. But yeah, I think there's a lot that, yeah, just our body can tell us about what a situation means to us.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, when it comes to defense and boundaries, in some ways there's a lot less of a line between the magical realms and the physical realms than one might think. When I first started opening up and understood that there were non-incarnate beings around us, and when I first started having contact with these beings, the sort of new age philosophy around a lot of that stuff at the time was very much the feeling that if it's disincarnate, it is wise and it is powerful and it's there for our good, and we should invite messages, and we should, like I learned channeling and I learned a lot of different techniques to help bring wisdom from the other side to this side. And then I slowly over time realized that there's a lot of different types of beings out there, just like there are a ton of different kinds of people in the world.
Yeah, critical thinking is good in these matters, totally. Yeah.
Right? So I slowly had to start to realize it didn't matter what context it was in. It didn't matter what someone else said about any particular being, whatever it was. Whenever I encounter a non-incarnate or disincarnate energy, and using the spirit model in this case, but whenever I encounter that, I am going to treat that being exactly the same way as I would treat any person on the street that I have not yet met. Yep, if they're a friend of a friend, I'm more likely to be a little more open and friendly, but I am still going to be assessing and using my intuition and using, my body's intuition to let me know how much to let this person in or this being in. That's layer number one of self-defense, physical or magical or psychic, is, can I get a feel for this person? Can I get a feel for this being, and how comfortable am I around them? And how am I going to react, to having them in my personal space?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, what to do about it? That's always the question. Something I've noticed over the years, there are people who are naturals with certain gifts, and then there are others who have to work really, really hard to achieve the same sorts of things. I am a natural empath. I've been able to feel the emotions of others at a distance. I knew this since I was a young child. I didn't have a word for it until I was a teenager, and I read a book, a Spider Robinson book called Telempath, and I read this word empath and sort of got a definition for it, and it was like, oh, I hadn't realized that no one else, I didn't realize that most other people didn't feel things the way I felt them, which was very confusing. But it started to explain a lot of the hurt I had observed and experienced when I suddenly realized that, for most people, hurting someone else's feelings doesn't hurt them. And sometimes it actually makes them feel better about themselves. That had always confused me, because to me, when I hurt somebody else's feelings, it hurts me too. And so I really don't like to do that. Whenever possible, I will avoid hurting someone else because I don't enjoy that hurt, which again makes boundaries a little bit harder, because if you're too much on that track, I suppose it's very easy to get into people pleasing. I don't want anyone to be upset. I don't want anyone to be angry. I don't want anyone to be hurt. So therefore, I'm going to go out of my way to make sure that everybody feels good, even if that means me not feeling good. And so that was a learning of how to set boundaries that I had to do in my interpersonal world, which, because I had to learn that consciously, made it easier to do so in the spirit realm or in the magical realms as well. So the reason why I bring that up is, yeah, some people are going to be more naturally gifted when it comes to sensing the intentions of another being, and other people are going to be more natural at being able to manipulate and move energy. But my experience has been that people who are naturals at a thing often have to work very hard to control that. Like, for example, people that are very wide open when it comes to seeing, for example, they will see spirits, they will see disincarnated people, they will see beings, whatever it is. I won't necessarily have any kind of a visual reference for those beings, but I can feel them. Right now, for the people that are natural seers, it's hard for them to shut that out. It's hard for them to not see. Just like for me as a natural sensor, I have trouble not feeling the things, and so
Yeah.
so that's one thing. Because your audience is going to be, I know, is comprised of both some very strong naturally gifted folks and others who are seekers and who are trying really hard to open themselves up
And
in
maybe
different
even some
ways,
skeptics too, which is great. So
and
yeah.
probably some skeptics too, you betcha. Yeah, it just, that's something that I wanted to bring up, because I know for some people this is going to be easier than for others, and I want the people who it doesn't feel natural and easy for to know that this is, like any muscle, something that you can train, something that you can strengthen intentionally, and something you can get good at, even if it's not your natural gifts. Makes
Yeah,
sense.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would say that a lot of what we do, you might have natural aptitude for some of it, but these are skill sets that can be, through time and work and diligence,
Hmm.
built up. So fuck yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so just like in your personal life, you've got a boundary, a personal space boundary that you would not be comfortable with a stranger crossing. So too energetically, and so when I'm working with someone and helping them to learn to sort of create their defenses and their magical boundaries, I will have them really learn to feel into the space around them, um, and if possible, get a feel for where the edges of your aura are. And I'm going to use the term aura. You could use light body, you could use energy bodies. There's all the different words that we can use, but essentially there is a space around you. And for the scientific model, there's a space around you that is filled with a higher concentration of the electromagnetic frequencies that we as human beings emit, right? And like any field, it will tend to drop off fairly quickly after a certain point. And so that's what I would then define as your auric field, is the area around you in which your personal energy is strong, defined, and I'm going to use the word dominant, the
Or
space in which you
predominant in
have,
the space or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, the space in which you have some personal autonomy, authority, and control, just like in martial arts, if you come within the sphere of, if I reach my hand out and I hold my palm up, or face my palm outwards towards someone, that's my sort of basic personal space, right?
Mhm.
If someone comes within that space, now, yes, they could be within my guard, but they're also within my grasp, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Sure, absolutely. Or, you can, through the use of, say, like a weapon like a bow, increase the sphere of the space, right? Like,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yeah. And now, of course, now with that, you're talking about more of an offensive defense, right? Now that's you sending energy out, which is absolutely super useful and really good to learn when you're learning psychic self-defense, because yes, there's going to be times where the best defense is a good offense. So very useful to know that. But yeah, as far as my own personal space and my own sort of uh, outer boundary of my auric field, I have learned to differentiate, because I'm a feeler. I've learned to differentiate multiple layers of energy bodies, that encompass my physical body. And yeah, that space that's sort of just outside the range of where my outstretched hand would go is kind of that outer bound for me of my personal energetic space, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And so what I like to do is when I'm creating my defenses, I've got three layers of what I think of as armor. I've got a layer of shielding that sort of surrounds me on that auric layer. I've got another layer that surrounds me that's maybe sort of 6 or 8 inches out from my physical shell that surrounds me. And then I've got another layer that's sealed to or synced to or a part of essentially the skin of this body, right? It's like my personal armor, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I like to create these 3 layers of shielding because each one will do something slightly different. And so I can turn those on either one at a time or all at once, depending on the situation I'm in. And psychologically, what that does is gives me a feeling of safety and feeling empowered, right? Now I feel like I'm less vulnerable and therefore I'm more confident walking into the space or dealing with this person that I'm dealing with or whatever that might be.
Sure. And from a psychological model, just that confidence itself will actually make you, by some ways of thinking about it, like less of an attractive target too.
Exactly. Yeah. When it comes to the physical stuff, walking down the street, if you look like you're vulnerable or a target, you're more likely to be preyed on than if you look confident and feel confident as you walk through the world.
Yeah, and these discussions can sometimes veer into sort of gross, like victim blamey territory, which I definitely think we should stay away from. But this is sort of thinking
certainly.
that we're trained in when it comes to this kind of stuff, for sure. So it bears mentioning. Yeah. So yeah,
absolutely. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no intention to victim shame there at all. As someone who was, I was picked on pretty heavily as a kid. I went through a fair amount of bullying. I moved to a small prairie town in Canada from Norway at about 10 years of age, and I was a somewhat pudgy kid, Jehovah's Witness, didn't celebrate any of the things, and had a weird accent, and my mom dressed me funny for the first day of school because she thought it was picture day, so not the best foot to start out on. So I had to learn fairly quickly about defensive boundaries because, I received a lot of hostile energy over my school years.
Gosh, I'm sorry. That sucks.
Oh yeah, well that's just part of what happened. But had that not happened, I wouldn't have been forced to learn some of the things that I've had to learn that have really helped me throughout the rest of my life. And part of that was, how do I make myself a less attractive target? And yeah, there are definitely ways that you can do that, and they're not in any way going to stop. If someone has decided that you are their target, that's something you're going to have to deal with no matter what. But for the people that are looking for easy prey, there are ways of making oneself less tempting, I suppose. And yeah, again, I'm not trying to do any kind of victim blaming on this because I don't think it's something we should have to learn. I don't feel like it's something that we have built into us. It's something I had to learn through adverse experience. And so it's something that I like to offer to others who might be experiencing similar things and are looking for ways to deal with it.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of on a sort of like metaphysical plane, this also, it's not necessarily all whatever flowers and roses out there, like crystals and roses or whatever. Right? So, you might encounter some hostile stuff or some stuff that just really might not have your best interests at heart or just might not really like understand like humans and our like whole biological thing and like that. I don't know. There might be like a lot of layers of translation too in my experience that I don't know. So yeah, it's best to just be cautious.
Exactly. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I've definitely, other people are definitely something I've had to learn to defend against both physically and energetically. When I was sort of earlier in my studies and so on, I came into some of the pagan groups in Calgary. And at that time, there were some very interesting personalities and factions and things happening. And there was basically energy battles. There were individuals and groups of people who were using what they knew about energy to curse each other, to try to harm each other. Like there was a lot of animosity and there was a lot of energy flying around with negative intent. And again, that confused me coming into it. I was a little bit like, why are we trying to hurt one another? There's a few enough of us as there is that are into this stuff and that understand these things. And so why are we battling each other again? Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, I had to when I walked into that space, I had to learn how to protect myself from those kinds of energies because I wanted to be Switzerland. I wanted to be neutral. I had no interest in participating in any of that. But that also meant that, as with any conflict or battle, you can be collateral damage.
Collateral damage. Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. And especially as like a sensitive person, like those types of energies might be deleterious to spend a lot of time around, right? Like, I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I've definitely had both experienced malicious intent from other humans, and I've also experienced needing to defend myself against non-human, and I'm going to say not even disincarnate, but never incarnate beings or energies that have their own agenda and care very little about how that impacts others or us specifically.
Yeah, and I've kind of started to contextualize some of this as like patterns of being in the world that sometimes afflict our species, like things like psychological afflictions and stuff like that. I can sometimes kind of think of them as being sort of like these predatory egregores that are sometimes on the scene. I don't know though. It's an interesting philosophical thing to noodle with, but yeah.
It really is. Yeah. I have a lot of fun with the different models because some things translate really easily, and other times some of the experiences I've had in the energetic planes I have a really hard time finding an analog for.
Sure.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. That's why I like that there are all these models and different ways of like looking at it, because ultimately we're describing like a territory that we can sort of only go to ourselves. We can't like necessarily like bring somebody else there with us in our minds or whatever in our experience. So it's already going to be so difficult to like use language to draw these maps and everything.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
it's
apologies
good
to everybody if I'm switching back and forth between models a lot. It's like you say, just trying to find words that will make sense.
Yeah, and I think for me too, like I'm such a person that tends to take language like very literally that when I first started like really getting out there and like talking to other people about their experiences with this stuff, it was really hard for me to sort of like parse out that a lot of what people say is sort of like figurative and not exactly like literal. So there was for me there was a huge learning curve just in terms of like kind of I guess like figuring out how to like code switch into the way that people share about these experiences versus how they might share about like going to the grocery store or something and like yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you say, "Oh yeah, I saw a friend of mine at the store," versus "I saw this spirit when I was in circle in this ritual," you're probably saying different things.
Yeah, you mean
Probably
different
not.
thing by the verb saw. Like it means like
Yeah.
you like encountered them or whatever. That can mean a
Yeah.
lot of different things. And so in the past I feel like, wow, everybody's just like totally full of shit. Right? So but that was just me not understanding what people were meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you know, when you're coming into this brand new, like you've seen the movies with all of the special effects, and you're kind of like you're wanting the magic, the movie magic, right?
Yeah,
Like,
you want it to be like Harry Potter or The Craft or whatever, and like
yeah, like I want to see all the flashy lights, and I want to levitate and all of these things, and it's like, okay, well, I'm not saying that's not possible. There are so many stories from so many cultures all through time and space on this planet that were theoretically not connected, you know, that did not share knowledge or information, and yet they come up with the same concepts and they come up with the same stories, and like that really intrigues me, you know. So
Sure.
so I certainly go into it thinking like, well, anything is possible. Some things might be more probable than other things, you know.
I suspect that too, right? Yeah. Yes, I
Yeah.
think that's safe. Yeah.
But I like to leave room for the possible, you know.
Sure. Absolutely.
Uh,
So, kind
yeah.
of moving on to psychic self-defense, if that's okay.
Mhm.
When we hung out, this was probably, gosh, about a year and a half ago now, or what? It was a while ago, but we had a little gathering in Portland at the time, and you were able to join us for that. And at the time, you presented a really cool little workshop about psychic self-defense and some kind of thinking that you had done surrounding that. And I was hoping if you wouldn't mind giving me a little refresher and sharing some of that with the listeners.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so psychic self-defense, I think I called it psychic self-defense 101 or defense against the dark arts 101 or something like that. But essentially, yeah, it was sort of a primer on this whole topic. And the way I started out, and the way I like to start out is with the tools that the traditional Western mage carries. And generally speaking, that would be a wand and a blade. And I've seen this mirrored in multiple other cultures as well in different magical systems. There, generally speaking, you've got something that can help you to focus energy and project it or send it or move it. And then you've also got a usually metal item, although not always, but some sort of item that also is good at conducting and channeling energy, but that is more of a cutting or slicing or defensive kind of like a tool that you can use in a different way than just sending the energy, using it to kind of defend as well. And several links, which is important, and we'll come to that later. But those tools, like all of the tools I feel in our systems, are, well, they're just that. They're tools that allow us to do things that we can do without them, but they do make it easier because they give us a focal point. And so, can you cast a circle without wand? Yeah, absolutely. Can you cut cords without a blade? Yes, absolutely. All of these things. But they help you to get to a place, right? They help you to reach a state of mind, or the ritual that you're doing while you're using these tools helps to get you to a certain state of mind where you have more power and control of your own energy and of the energy that you are sending and receiving. And so when I pick up a wand or when I pick up my thumb, I'm not just picking up a stick and a knife. I'm picking up all of the hours of ritual work that I have done holding these objects or objects like them, where I've practiced getting into a mind space, getting into an energetic space, grounding and centering, and being psychologically ready, whether that's to do battle or do good or whatever whatever it is that I want to do. It steps me into that space of readiness. And so if I'm in a hurry, if I'm feeling attacked, for example, and I feel like I need to do something about this right now, then I might not feel like I've got the time to, meditate and clear my mind for a while and then call a circle and then, go through a certain set of ritual steps and all of these things. Like, no, I need a shield now, right? And so that's where having these physical tokens, these items, I can pick that up and be in that space now. Right? Now, I like to do the same thing for myself physically without those tools, I guess, but I give myself psychological versions of those tools. And so in the context of self-defense, I was talking about those 3 layers of shielding, or those three layers of defense that I like to put around me. And so what I've done is I studied hypnosis for a little while because I was very interested in reprogramming my own mind. And one of the most useful things that came out of that was post-hypnotic suggestion. And so essentially that is where if you're in a very receptive state or you're in a very suggestible state, you can have a certain suggestion implanted that will stay there after the session is over and can be triggered either intentionally or unintentionally. But nonetheless, whether it's a word or an action or seeing something or whatever it is, that can then trigger a response in your subconscious. And so I thought about that for a long time and how it would apply to, my magical work. And I realized that I can use a post-hypnotic trigger to then activate certain states. I started out with what I call a mirror shield. And so I put that into the outer layer, my outer aura layer, essentially. And so what I would do is I would go deep into a meditative space for myself, and I'd make it as controlled as possible. Both my physical environment, I wanted to make sure that I was not going to be interrupted. I felt safe in my space, right? Doors locked, windows locked, blinds closed, ringers off, like whatever, all of it, so that I was feeling safe and cocooned in this bubble. And then I cast Ritual Circle, and for me that means calling corners and inviting allies and clearing the space entirely of any energy that is not intentionally desired or requested there. And that helps to put me in a space where now I am feeling both energetically and physically safe, right? Then within that ritual space, then I would go even deeper. I'd go into my meditations even further and I would think of things that made me feel safe. And this wasn't necessarily focusing on individual images per se or individual objects, but more just the feelings that came with them. For me, there was the feeling of being held by my dad's arms, the feeling of being held by my mother, the feeling the first time I put on a pair of gloves for for boxing training and martial arts training, that feeling of power of like, oh, okay, I'm ready to fight, the feeling that came from successfully completing my first kata in martial arts, the feeling that came from the first time I warded off somebody's physical attack, the first time that I successfully verbally parried somebody's verbal attack, like I would just bring all of these memories in that were times when I felt powerful and accomplished and safe, and I would just really focus on the feelings from those things, not focusing on those actual events, but the feelings of that. And I just filled my heart space, my heart chakra, if you want to use that terminology, and then expanded out into my auric space until it really filled that bubble, right? And so now I've got this auric space that's absolutely full of the energy of me feeling protected and strong. And now I push that into the outer boundary around my aura. And on the outside of that, I put like a two-way mirror, like a really shiny reflective coating or covering around my auric shell or this bubble that if anyone was looking, they would only see the reflections of what's around me. They wouldn't actually perceive the bubble. They wouldn't actually perceive me, but just see a reflection of what's happening around them. So essentially kind of an invisibility, but also a mirror in the sense that if someone did send any kind of energy or was sending energy my way, it would just bounce. It would just kind of be reflected off of it as if there was nothing there. It just would go into whatever the surroundings are as if nothing was there to receive it. And so that was the very first shell or the first layer of defense that I ever came up with. And I got better at it. I got better over the years. This is not something that I did just once. This is something that I did over and over and over again. Almost every time I went into ritual space for several years, I would spend at least 5 or 10 minutes sort of strengthening and reinforcing that shield. And every time I was in that place where I was really filled with that energy and I was really feeling that energy, I would do a gesture, a movement, something that was very easy for me to do unnoticed if I was out in public, and a gesture that I would not normally make. So say, for example, like I'll just say, tapping your little finger against your thumb 3 times, for example, very intentionally at a certain speed. And I would repeat that action over and over while I was in that space. And then I'd come out of it and I'd step out of my ritual space and I'd close the circle. And then I would do that action again. And I'd try to feel that feeling again right away. And just process of repetition and process of practice essentially made it so that eventually all I had to do, even in the middle of, I could be in regular beta brain space, I could be at work and having a rough time, blah, blah, blah. And maybe, somebody comes at me with some really hostile energy. I could completely undiscernible to them, do this action, just do this tap, tap, tap. And immediately I'd have this shell up around me. I'd have this mirror space around me. And when I realized and I started using that in the world and it felt effective, I noticed that like people's anger started to kind of be deflected. I was working for a corporation doing tech support essentially for customers, and usually by the time they'd gotten to me, they'd been through at least 1 or 2 other people who weren't able to help them, and they had often spent several hours on hold, and so there was a lot of frustration and anger. And I noticed that when I put this bubble up, even though I was dealing with them remotely, this bubble was helping to deflect it. And so instead of coming at me about it, they were talking with me about it, but the anger was directed at the situation, the corporation. Yeah. So as I started to see more and more of that working in the world, I decided to add in more layers, So that's how I came up with the second layer and the final layer, the sort of second skin armor. And Yeah, and the same process with each of those, where I would go into that space, I would evoke that emotion, I'd really hold it for as intensely and long as I could, and while I was in that, continually repeat this action over and over and over again, so that that action became associated with that state, and essentially I've then created a magical post-hypnotic suggestion that when this action occurs, this energetic result happens.
Yeah, right on. That makes a lot of sense. And actually, I think there might be a sort of like common cultural touchstone with the way that Catholics cross themselves, because I think there might be
Mhm.
sort of something similar going on there. I love it. Fuck yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's and that's what I start with as sort of my basic primer on how you can do magical self-defense. And I definitely go into power objects sometimes. I love to show people how they can use anything from a beautiful crystal to just a rock you find on the side of the road or whatever. There's so many different things that you can do, but that right there to me felt the most personally beneficial, because it was something that I could do that did not require any other thing. It did not require any other person. It didn't require the assistance of any being other than myself. It was pure something I could do with my energy and my space that gives me this feeling of being protected. And then psychologically, I am more prepared to face whatever it is that's going on.
Yeah, fuck yeah. I appreciate you being so generous with sharing about your time and your experiences with this stuff. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
As much as I didn't want to hear it back when I was starting, it takes time. There's no magic bullet that I'm aware of. There's no, I never found the magic words that would suddenly activate my powers. I never found that special enchanted object that suddenly unleashed my, you know, true potential or any of that kind of stuff. And even when it came to teachers, I had many teachers, some of them in the physical, some of them non-physical, some of them books. I never found the one guru who was going to like help me unlock all of the things and show me all of the stuff. So really when it came down to it, for me, it was about taking personal responsibility for my own state of mind, and doing whatever I could do to manifest myself as who I want to be in the world. And so, yeah, that took time. That took a lot of messing around and trying things. It took a lot of stepping into spaces and suspending my disbelief and being really wide open to things that didn't necessarily make sense to me, but that was willing to give it a true and honest shot, but also not allowing myself to get hooked into it. And so being able to step out of that every once in a while and apply some critical thinking and do some scientific method testing of like, does this work for me? Does this actually connect? Can I use this? And so, yeah, I really do. I'd like to come back to the Bruce Lee came up with his own system of martial arts, Jeet Kune Do. And
Yeah,
in
he's
it,
kind of like the chaos magician of martial arts, or eclectic
yes,
witchcraft person of martial arts, if depending on one's outlook.
exactly.
But yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's, he's been a real inspiration to me, both magically and martially, I guess. But yeah, the thing about him was he learned those other systems really, really well. Like he knew those other systems to a certain point of mastery. He didn't dedicate as much time and energy to them as someone who was a 20-year or 40-year master of that particular art. But he put enough time in that he could operate and function within that system and do well at it. Then he stepped back and was like, well, I can ignore that rule and I can bend this rule and I can take this particular set of moves and combine it with this other set of moves I know, and so, yeah, like you say, essentially chaos magic, but physical. So, but I think the thing that maybe gets forgotten is getting good at each of those systems, so
Mhm.
you know which rules you can break, and so that you can benefit from the structures within those that actually do help.
Yeah, totally.
I
No,
do recommend giving that space and time.
yeah, absolutely. This reminds me of way back in the day when I was studying writing. One of my teachers said that like E.E. Cummings doesn't like break the rules of English because he like doesn't understand English, right? He like knows
Right.
exactly what he's doing and he's doing it for a reason, for an effect, because he understands it so well.
Exactly.
So fuck yeah, thank you. Well, Catalyst, is there anything that you're excited about that you would like to plug or let the listeners know about?
Oh, I am not currently selling anything, or I haven't finished any books. I don't really have much to plug. I don't spend a lot of time on social media.
Well, lucky you.
Yeah, I mean, I do my best. I go on little Instagram binges from time to time, but yeah, I'm not really on Facebook. Yeah, so I don't really have a whole lot to plug that way. I have been having so much fun. I've been studying sex magic pretty deeply for the last, I don't know, 15 years or so, and I've been having a lot of fun in that arena. More so of late, just having fun playing with other people who are super energy sensitive, and some of the incredible fireworks that can happen and some of the incredible energy you can generate working with other practitioners in that space, and also with kink and BDSM as well. And yeah, I'm just having a lot of fun with that right now. So
Fuck
anyone
yeah.
that's interested in those, I love to talk about it. I love to talk about my experiences, and I love to help people. And I also don't have a ton of energy because of a physical disorder that I'm working to clear. And so I very much invite people to reach out to me either on the server, on Discord, through the Green Mushroom server. Also, I'm happy to talk to people on other platforms as well. Once I've had a chance to get to know them, I'll send you a link to my one of my profiles that people can use to get a hold of me. That helps.
Okay, hell yeah. Well, thank you. And maybe I can have you back solo to do a talk about sex magic sometime. I know that this is something that's come up on the show before, and it's an evergreen topic that people are probably always going to be interested in. So yeah, I would love to hear your perspectives. Everybody's got a little bit of a different dish cooking in that kitchen as far as I've been able to like ascertain. So fuck yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, that'd be great.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Catalyst. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
3, Romeo, 2, 2, 4, Yankee, Romeo, 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec.
All right. Thanks so much to Catalyst for joining me. You can also hear him in previous episodes of the Magic and Mental Health series in the Magical Thinking episodes. So check that out if you haven't already. Lots of good stuff to think about there. The personal shielding thing, I think, is something that a lot of us can sort of intuitively grasp. And the notion of focusing on filling the space within one's bubble with so much good stuff that the shitty things can't get in also reminds me of what we talked about a little bit with Pear, aka the Tom O'Bedlam in the last episode. Boundaries in Psychic Self-Defense Part 1. I really appreciate that Catalyst outlined the type of praxis that he used to get there, too. I think that there's a lot of, at least for me, useful tidbits there. Stoked to share the next part of our discussion featuring Lonnie Scott of Weird Web Radio podcast soon. But first, real quick, as promised, let's return to the conversation about boundaries and rules that was happening in popular culture a little while back, a couple years back now. Catalyst brought up that in polyamorous spaces, there are often discussions about the difference between rules and boundaries. And I think this situation kind of hits on that. So let's introduce the characters of the story properly. The movie guy is named Jonah Hill. He's an American actor and filmmaker. He ranked 28th on Forbes' list of highest paid actors from June 2014 to June 2015 at $16 million. I don't know how accurate any of these things are. This is from Wikipedia. Thank you, Wikipedia. Among his accolades, it continues on, are nominations for 2 Academy Awards, a BAFTA Award, and 2 Golden Globe Awards. Gratitude, Wikipedia. I also learned there that Sarah Brady, who is the other character in this story, is Jonah Hill's ex-girlfriend, who the two of them dated back in 2021. And Sarah Brady was at the time a surfing instructor and law student. I also learned from this Wikipedia entry that during the same month that Sarah Brady came forward with the allegations that we will be talking about, Former child actress Alexa Nichols accused Jonah Hill of shoving her against a door and kissing her without her consent during a house party when she was 16 and he was 24. Hill's attorney has denied that this happened. Okay, so thanks to Wikipedia for that introduction of our short cast of characters. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit from an article published on Vogue.com on July 11th of 2023 by Raven Smith, which gets into the discussion about boundaries and how they can be sort of like twisted into coercive places. So, Raven writes, over the weekend, Jonah Hill's ex-girlfriend Sarah Brady leaked a series of messages between the two, detailing alarming, quote, boundaries Hill set out for the now-ended relationship. Hill allegedly, the exchange isn't verified, explained his needs for romantic partnerships didn't support Brady, quote, surfing with men, quote, boundaryless, inappropriate friendships with men, posting pictures in a bathing suit, posting sexual pictures, modeling, or friendships with women who are in stable places from your wild past beyond getting lunch or a coffee or something respectful. End quote. Many of us have joked, Raven writes, that this sounds like the perfect, marginally unhealthy, slightly disassociative, completely autonomous summer. We could even jokingly argue that boundaryless, inappropriate friendships with men are exactly what your 20s are for. But glibness, fun as it is, won't staunch the coercive control bleeding out of Hill's alleged words. For me, Raven writes, articulating boundaries means accurately identifying people, places, or things that test your mental truth, personal safety, or emotional well-being in order to make the decision to either challenge the overstep or remove yourself from the situation entirely. Boundaries are not a way to stop your partner surfing with men or modeling. Boundaries are not a device to contain another person's actions, to control them. It's amazing to see how the therapized language, something protective by design, is being used to breezily usher in manipulative, misogynistic behaviors. In this new normal, an icky era of weaponized therapy, soft boys argue your autonomy away with open logic and emotional upfrontness. It hurts me so bad when you seem free, and it's all being done so matter-of-factly. It's not dramatic. It's not forged in the outward rage we're used to seeing from toxic men. It feels reasoned and reasonable, verging on the emotionally pragmatic. And yet it's a hideous bunting of red flags, an incredibly eloquent exercise of coercive control. All right, so skipping ahead a bit in the article, Raven Smith continues on. By the logic of Hill's messages, the devices women use to catch a man, flesh, flirtation, frivolity, are to be stopped once the man is snared. When a woman retains pride in her appearance, when she keeps her confidence and maintains friendships on her own terms, she reinforces her autonomy, her capability apart from her partner, and above all emphasizes her position as not his possession. This is what the misogynists don't like, women who don't fall into submissive adjacent roles. These debates are never really about bathing suits or boundaries. The guise of caring for her well-being is erroneous. They're about a woman relinquishing who she is for her man. Raven concluded the piece with these thoughts. Finally, there's been some debate on whether Brady should have released the private messages in the first place. Was it justice that motivated her, or was it vengeance? Some echelons are asking if coercive men should be as entitled to privacy as the rest of us. On that, I will say only this. Toxic, coercive, manipulative misogyny won't dry up if we keep it behind closed doors. We have to out it to stamp it out. Thinking of Hill as the bad guy misses the point because the entire system needs our scrutiny. We have to keep shedding light on these men. There's nowhere to hide in the spotlight. Okay, thank you to Raven Smith for that. Okay, so this is Lux again. I personally have no idea what happened between these two people. I mean, hell, I barely even know who they are. But that's not really what matters, I think. The types of patterns that we see talked about in the article can sort of crop up all over the place in different contexts. It can happen in romantic relationships between people of any genders. It can happen in friendships. It can also arise in other places, like at work or school or politics. Being able to recognize the patterns, wherever they might be, is what seems most important. I think to figure out what's sort of going on, it's important to look at the power dynamics of any given situation. Looking at our little example, the Jonah Hill guy, as Wikipedia tells us, is like a super rich and successful actor, where his girlfriend at the time, Sarah Brady, was like a law student and like a surf instructor. So even though he obviously had like way more money and fame and success and like power in the world and in the relationship, I mean, leaving alone any gender stuff that might come in, that didn't stop him from being like so, I mean, from the sounds of it, like tragically insecure in himself that he felt the need to get all like controlling and shitty. So I snagged a few points about the differences between boundaries and rules from simplepsychology.com because I thought it would be nice to sort of like have a couple of clear, concise, like little laid out statements. And I would love to hear people's thoughts about all this at luxoccultpod@gmail.com for the listener mail segment. Okay, so from simplepsychology.com, boundaries are about defining your own personal space, limits, and needs. They are a way to communicate what you are comfortable with and will not tolerate in a relationship. Boundaries are essential for maintaining your own well-being and sense of self within a relationship. Rules are more about controlling or restricting the other person's behavior. When one person imposes rules on the other, it can violate their autonomy and independence. Rules are often associated with consequences or punishments if they're not followed, which can create a sense of fear or resentment in the relationship. Okay, so thanks to Simple Psychology for that. So boundaries are sort of about controlling your own space and time and limits and stuff, and rules are about controlling what other people do in their own space and time. So good stuff to think about here. All right, I will be back at the end of the episode to share some updates about the Green Mushroom Project, as well as some final thoughts. But now I'm very stoked to share the conversation that I had with Lonnie Scott of Weird Web Radio Podcast. During our conversation, Lonnie mentions The Crossroads and Aiden, by whom he means Aidan Wachter, author of such books as Weaving Fate, Changeling, and Six Ways. Aiden and I actually recently recorded a conversation for the show, which I'm very stoked to share with you all soon. And some of what we've been talking about here today will actually come up there too. So it's nice when things kind of tie themselves up in tidy ways like that. So yes, make sure to keep an eye out for that in your podcast feed soon. We talked about a very cool new project that Aiden has launched about looking forward and kind of focusing on the path to better times, as well as looking back and doing a little bit of a retrospective about Aiden's experiences with Temple of Psychic Youth and how some of those magical currents are relevant in what's happening today. There's some interesting parallels there that we explored. So very fun conversation and stoked to share it with you all. But now I am super stoked to share the conversation that Lonnie Scott from Weird Web Radio and I recorded about boundaries and psychic self-defense. Lonnie's going to get into all kinds of good stuff, including his own praxis involving spiritual hygiene and cleansing using water. Good stuff. So let's go ahead and get into it here. All right. Well, my next guest for today's panel on boundaries and psychic self-defense is Lonnie Scott from Weird Web Radio. Lonnie, how's it going?
It's going great. And I'm sorry that my alliterative title of my show, it seems to trip people up sometimes.
It's good. It's always good to have a little bit of a tongue twister to warm up your mouth before an interview. So how's it going? You've been on the show a couple times before to talk about inclusive heathenry and other work. But yeah, thank you so much for being willing to lend your thoughts to our peer-to-peer panel about magic and mental health. This is a series that we've been doing for, I don't know, maybe like a half a year or a year now. And this one, as you know, is about boundaries and psychic self-defense. So the question that's posed to the panelists is, how do we define and delineate boundaries in our magical work and in our interpersonal lives? Is there intersection between how you protect yourself from potentially unhelpful magical forces or energies or whatever, and potentially unhelpful people? What are some experiences in this area that others might find useful to hear about? How do we define psychic self-defense, and how do we practice it? And what are some experiences or tips there that you might like to share? So it's kind of a
Okay.
lot, but yeah, I'm so excited to hear your perspectives about all this.
Yeah, that is a lot. So when it comes to that, just in my worldview, the world itself is magical. I'm an animist at heart. In heathenry, we see everything as just alive. And if it's magical at home, it's magical in the world. It just is what it is. That's my own take on that. That's not just a general heathen view, but that's how I, roll it out into my life. So I begin every day with the crossroads centering, yeah, Aiden teaches this, and it's something that he came up with several years ago, actually now. And I adopted it to be my own kind of thing, but I acknowledge myself as a crossroads, that avatar that of what all that kind of thing means. Not only that spiritually, but I mean, we all are just, I mean, we've got unbelievable amounts of different forces and energy and whatever just moving through us all the time. One of my favorite things that I think about when it comes to that is like we have the vibrations or an energy of two black holes colliding somewhere out there in space rolling through us right now. That's so fucking cool. And I like it. But that's how I begin my day. So I'm already acknowledging myself as something that's already in tune with my magic and my spirituality. And I mean, my gods, my spirits, my allies, they're with me. It's not that they're not just with me at the altar, they're not just with me at the temple, they're with me at all times. So if I'm out in the world, just going about my day-to-day life, you're encountering me as a part of that ecology of forces. No different than I'm encountering you as an ecology of whatever spiritual forces you may be entangled with. So there's that. I think about this too, like you can walk into a room and kind of get the feel of it. An empty room even, has character. It has a vibe. It has an energy that you can tune into and notice. Same as a room with people in it, full of people, a bar, a church, a living room of a place you've never been, but there's people there, and a group, and you can kind of catch a vibe off of that. And I think that comes into that boundary question as well. And if you're in tune with your intuition, you will notice that. And other than that, I would say the whole thing about boundaries, it comes down to really paying attention to your intuition. You know, um, we have a great instinct for fear, hardwired into us through evolution. In fact, there's a book called The Gift of Fear that I highly recommend people read to understand that a little bit better.
Well, yeah, I love that one.
Yeah, it's a great one. And is the same as I was just talking about, like rooms and environments. If we are more attentive to what's going on around us, more aware of our own bodies in space, you'll notice those shifts in energy, and you'll also notice your own internal systems telling you, yes, this place is okay. No, don't go there. Stay home today. The other day, like I was talking about looking at plane tickets for a flight I was thinking about taking just to get away from winter for a minute. And then I was talking about it with a friend of mine who's a bartender. And while we were talking, a Leonard Skinner song comes on, and we were talking about how their music stands up to time. And isn't it wild? Like they lost people in the plane crash and they kept going, and their music's so good. And then immediately after was a John Denver tune. And we're like, didn't John Denver die in a plane crash? And then we were both like, we're not, no, not taking that wild random trip.
All of a sudden, the plane ride is sounding less inviting. Okay.
Yeah, and it could be silly. And if it was important, I would work magic just to make my fear go away and do something else. But since it's just a random thought, I thought this is too crazy. Like I'll just let the synchronicities tell me to stay home, and maybe the plane will be fine that way,
Well, sure. And I think there's also something to be said for like respecting your own internal boundaries. For whatever reason, like there was something there that you didn't feel comfortable with, and you said no, thank you, and backed away.
That's
And then,
right.
yeah, it's good.
And subconsciously, my credit card was telling me, don't do it. But anyway, that's what I was thinking about your first part of that question with boundaries in the interpersonal lives. Does that make sense to
Yeah,
the question?
absolutely. Yeah, I think the
Okay.
idea of like really like listening to what your body is telling you, whether that's in a magical situation or in a social or, other type of situation, always makes sense. I think that the body has all kinds of data that it's trying to like give us that we're not like completely cognizant of in our, rational thinking mind. So, yeah,
Yeah.
if you're feeling weird and anxious about something, it's worth kind of investigating why that might be.
Yeah. It's legitimate. You should honor that, at
Mhm.
least for further investigation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Thank you. Yeah.
What was it you said? Experiences, right? Well, that was the next part.
Yeah, yeah. If there's any experiences you might like to share or thoughts about how you protect yourself other than just listening to, is there any like practices that you like to engage in or other things like that for protective work, or is it something that you just sort of approach from that space that you described earlier?
Well, I think a lot of the protective work for us in magical spaces begins with your work. What are you doing on a regular basis? Like I have a daily practice that involves not, energy work for one, that kind of centers me in what I'm doing. That's the crossroads part. And there's more to it, but it involves some energy work. I make offerings daily to my allies, as people call them, the peeps, the posse, those who aid, guide, and protect the named and nameless both. There is a well-oiled relationship there of
Mm.
reciprocity between me and the allies. That is a huge part of it alone. Just knowing that I have that relationship with them. It's kind of like I think of it the way the FBI talks about terrorist attacks, and like, you don't hear about the ones that we stop.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
If your protection magic is working well, you might not know about it because it's working or whatever. There's also
right.
thoughts about like, if you have a protection charm that ends up like breaking, then people might say like, well, that was it doing its job and absorbing something that might have been coming for you otherwise or something like that too. But so
Hmm.
yeah.
I've heard that as well. Yeah. So having that relationship with the allies is a huge part of this. Another thing is good spiritual hygiene, like daily cleansing. I have a cleansing ritual that I do in the morning, and I have one that I do at night before I go to sleep. And it involves water, right? It's a ritual running with cold water. I use running water out of the faucet while it's going, but when I'm on the road, I will, or if I'm traveling and I can't get to a faucet, I'll get a bottle of water, and I'll get my hands wet to do this. But water being a major thing, and I mean, water is a big part of elemental magic. There's a lot of lore connected to water in various forms and ways. Tarot has associations with water through the cups, the suit of the cups, and all of that's part of it. But really, where I got this idea to make water the most important part of my daily cleansing, I was reading an article in, I think it was like Psychology Today, a magazine or a journal years ago, about research into the ritual of people running their hands, like rubbing their hands together under cold water while considering things they felt guilt for or bad about or had negative emotions for it, right? And the effect it was having on actually changing their mindset with this simple practice. And then I marry that idea to, old folklore of, you know, the bad spirits not being able to cross running water. And I mean, there's running water everywhere, so spirits are fucked, right? But if that's true. But then, going back to like the tarot association and the cups, that's associated with water. Water often through that symbol set is associated with psychic development, psychic skills, psychic so on. All of these things come together in a way that when I run the water, I'm rubbing my hands together over the water and I'm visualizing it, just taking anything negative away. And, I have a ritual structure to this and something that I say, but that's an important part. It's good spiritual hygiene. And there are other techniques. If you don't want to use water, what's important to you? Maybe you want to use, if you're into magical tools, you might want to use like a wand or a knife or a dagger or something. I think Aiden in Six Ways teaches us a technique called scraping, where he's got something, where you're running a knife's edge near your body, visualizing, it's taking away negative elements.
Yeah, or even just like a piece of iron or something, or like,
So,
yeah.
yeah. Or I'm just something that where you get into a focused state that you're acknowledging that you have probably gotten dirty somehow. It doesn't even have to be something attacking you. I think just living in the world today, the way we do, we must offend a land spirit here and there, right? If you are amongst us in the magical realm, there are people in the world praying for your harm. I promise you, they're out there. Not you individually, but there are people who think we're evil and they don't want us. So you might as well wash those bad vibes away, right?
Sure. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, there's malefic intent that exists out there too. And I think there's also just the idea that we can go around and get sort of crossed up with energy or whatever. And just as in the course of the day, we encounter all kinds of things and we don't necessarily want to keep it all with us.
That's right. And I mean, and this may sound so easy that you won't believe me, but just kindness to others, kindness to yourself. Kindness in today's world is almost a radical act. It really is. And it disarms tension, it reduces stress. The dumbest things, they're so simple. It's just like holding a door open when you're ahead of someone to let them come through. Changes the mental state in others. And maybe that was the one thing that keeps them from being so stressed that they end up doing something stupid down the road. You will get a significant little boost of feel-good energy yourself when you see someone smile for something that you've done. The same thing is true within your own mind, between your ears. You're probably meaner to yourself than anyone praying against you, anyone magically attacking you, any curse that's been leveled at you. You, I'm afraid, are your worst enemy. And a good way to start dealing with that is this helpful, not helpful exercise. When you have the negative thoughts, when you feel like you're being drugged down, when you feel like there's a lot of negative energy, examine those thoughts a little bit by questioning, is that helpful? Is it not helpful? It's just simple little drill, right? I'm not telling you it's going to fix all your problems, but it's a good place to start.
Sure. And I also, when I'm kind of conducting these types of exercises, I like to also ask myself, like, what outside evidence is there for this notion, or what evidence is there against this notion? And like really kind of trying to look to the world to see if stories my brain is telling me are actually happening in the world, or and I'm, witnessing them, or if these are projections or other things like that. So the idea of like, yes, asking ourselves, is it useful, and also is it true? Is it actually is it actually the case? Yeah.
Right. And we're chaos magicians at heart, right? What's the last thing that you're usually told to do in a chaos magic ritual? Banish with what?
Well, with laughter, depending on what, what crowd you're in. But yeah, I mean, that's a popular one for sure.
Yeah, laughter. Learn how to laugh.
Yes.
Please. It matters. And all that goes back to what we're talking about. I think is just like dealing with the psychic garbage that you pick up, defense and protection against things, from the magical of having a solid relationship with your allies, all the way up to like if you have a deity that is involved with protection that you're fond of, establish a relationship with them, to cleansing, good spiritual hygiene, and some sort of energy work that centers yourself, all the way to the more practical and mundane of dealing with the thoughts in your head. Are they helpful or are they not? Building discernment for your experience in the world and your relationship to other people. And can you express more kindness, deliberate acts of kindness, small acts of kindness? I think it's a great thing. You know, you like in heathenry, you'll see that something come up a lot, right? Like people will be like, I want to get runes as a tattoo, or I want to wear a Mjolnir pendant or something of that nature, but I don't want to be associated with the white nationalists and the racists and stuff that are appropriating these symbol sets and using them in their own bullshit.
Mm.
And it's a legitimate fear that some people have, especially if they're new coming into any of this. Well, first of all, don't let those clowns own any of these symbols. You wear them, and be a person who not only has rune tattoos, I do, or wear a Mjolnir pendant, I do, but be the person with those things in the public sphere that's doing good things, good deeds, deliberate acts of kindness. The more people that see that happening, the action gets married to the symbol set, and then they see the clowns doing it, and it's not so quick to think, oh, everyone is like that. That's just one example in heathenry, right? It doesn't have to be about symbols or anything. It can just simply be about yourself. It's good psychic energy. You're building up good energy, because I do believe the kind of magic we get into attracts that kind of like energy back to us, that sort of spirit to be nearer or closer to our work or us, us in general. It's not karmic in the way I think about it. It's just like attracting like, if that makes sense.
So
I feel
things like
I've
rubbing
started
off
to
on each other.
ramble.
Like if you hang out with some people are more sensitive to this than others, but there's some folks that they can have lunch with somebody who lives in a different like part of the country per se, and by the end of their meal they'll be picking up speech mannerisms from the other person's like dialect. So I think that this can happen magically too, like when we engage with whatever we're engaging with, whether it's spirits or people or whatever, there's going to be a sort of like way that rubs off on us.
Agreed. Agreed. What else was part of that question? We moved away from I think there was a 3 or 4 part question. What else
Well, I
was
think you
part of that?
actually really brought us back to the last part of it with the idea of psychic self-defense, which I think you kind of described like a really good idea of like if part of what we must defend ourselves from psychically is our own human brain, telling us stories that might not be true, that might be like, lazy extrapolations or other things that brains do. And their brains are, oftentimes said to be assholes. So it's good to question
Hmm.
what they tell you. I think that we covered a little bit about that. But when it comes to psychic self-defense and other magical practices, is there anything else that comes up that you would like to share about, or any experiences you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think when it comes to that, it comes back to skill development first. That was a big part of in Liber Null. You have, instruction to develop image concentration and, concentration on thought and so on. And all they're doing is they pieced out specific skills in meditation to be more, specific exercises, building up a skill of meditation in a lot of ways. So you're building discernment to know your own mind in a lot of ways. I think is important for that. I think, I'm Jason Miller. He'll tell you in all of his courses and all of his books, the first thing he wants to talk about is how important meditation is. And that, to a degree, that's because of that kind of thing, is discernment of knowing your own mind, recognizing the other voice or the false voice versus your own awareness. That's one big important step. I understand some people feel they can't meditate, or they're not prone to meditation. I don't know what to advise you other than that. That's my step one. Step
There's a
two,
lot of different styles of meditation out there. I think what's offered in Libre Null is works well for some people, but it doesn't work at all for other people. So it doesn't work at all for you. There's like a lot of other ways of meditating that like aren't explored
Lieber
there too.
Knoll,
So
yeah,
yeah,
Lieber Knoll was doing, like I said, breaking it out into pieces. They're
exactly.
doing what
Yeah,
every Witchcraft 101 book has done since, and probably before. I don't know. Where
yeah,
it
but
says
there's
stare at a candle flame and
totally
try to hold that in your mind. Try to get good at a 4 count breath. That kind of stuff. There's
sure.
just specific little skill sets to teach you how to actually know your mind.
Mhm.
That's something that most people are akin or are prone to avoid. It takes work. And one thing I've learned in all the years I've been a part of this, a lot of people don't want to do that work. um,
Yeah. Yeah,
they're,
and you think a lot of people don't want to know. That does make sense, and that's, I mean, again, here's a theory of mind thing from my perspective, because like I'm curious about how the mind works, of course, and I mean, whatever.
me too.
But like, so yeah, that's to me that's wild. But you're right, it's a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of like taking
Hmm.
accountability. It's uncomfortable. It like sucks. It's often unpleasant or whatever. So that yeah, that
Right.
makes sense.
But to be fair, we all got into magic not to do a bunch of work. We got into magic because we think we can find the book, the tool, the thing that will make it all work anyway, right? That's something that
Or it's
it
just like
gets
a
into a
way
lot
of
of people's heads.
being. Yeah, for me, it's
Yeah,
just sort
I
of like a
mean,
way of being in the world that I just and I don't know, but yeah, for yeah, we do it for lots of different reasons.
well,
Totally. Yeah.
spell kits didn't sell a lot for no reason.
Sure. Yeah, and of course. And I think that like people have always been interested in these practices throughout history and across different cultures and stuff. So it
Hmm.
wouldn't be any different to find that, in our modern culture. So yeah.
I agree. Yeah, so my meditation is my step one. I highly advise that for the importance of knowing your own mind in whatever way you can get into it. And like you said, Luxa, there's more than one way to fry that fish. There's a lot of schools on how to do that. Energy work, goes back to what I was talking about earlier. I think some form of energy work really is important. And there's a ton of ways to get into it. Energy centers or just visualizing beams of energy, or in hypnosis, I teach something called autogenics, where there's no visualization at all. It's sensations that you generate in your own body,
Yeah. I've
which
studied that
is
actually. Has a
yeah, and it
problematic origin, but it is useful.
yeah, what doesn't have problematic
Well, this
origins
one,
anymore? You want to talk about
sure.
cell phones for a minute? No.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this one was developed by a Nazi, so
Right. In the lithium in your cell phone came from camps with children and
it's true.
slaves.
It's true.
So, I mean, I don't know what to do about a lot of that shit. But if we can avoid Nazi ideology, please, yes, do so. Steal the good stuff like Volkswagens and energy ideas if you can, but and give the fuckers credit.
And I don't think we have to give him credit. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then let's see, we're going with the defense aspect. Warding is another thing that I advise because one, it has a nice mental effect on you. Just knowing that you've done something that offers protection to your physical space will have a nice, like I said, psychic effect on you to calm down, to relax, to feel safe and protected. I do something every night at the entrance. It used to be when I lived in a house, it'd be, the entrances to the home. Now I'm in an apartment. It's the entrance into the apartment. It's a daily thing. I do a regular, on a lunar cycle, I do something with the windows. On a lunar cycle, I like to walk the block with a flame. It's a heathenry thing where I'm just like setting a boundary saying, hey, this space, all the good stuff, all who want to cause ill harm or you know bad intent outside this realm. I was speaking of personal experience. I used to just walk around my house, and then one day after I left a certain organization, I received some threats. And a tree that was in my neighbor's yard fell over. I can send you pictures if you want, and crashed into our yard, tore up our fence, damaged our garage, trashed the trampoline the kids played on, and cost a lot of money to clean up and make repairs. And I was talking to a friend of mine who suggested maybe you should walk the flame around the whole block. And I thought, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And I've done that ever since.
Yeah, and like
Um,
create some decoys or something, dude. Yeah, for
right?
sure. No, I mean, like, decoys are also a classic, magical thing, like a
I
jar
agree.
that you bury that's not near you. Or, I mean, actually, burying jars is considered to be a little bit ecologically irresponsible, but there's other ways of like doing similar magic that you're not putting glass in the ground. So, yes.
Agreed. And that goes by like warding in general. Like all of that stuff goes into the warding work. I'm creating barriers of protection. And all of that has a beautiful mental and psychic effect on me. It helps me sleep at night. Those would be the biggest areas I would say is, learn your own mind somehow, some way. Find what works for you in that realm. Whether it's specific exercises that you can do that helps you focus and be more aware of the movement of things mentally and how you relate to that, or it's just meditation in general, right? That you get into, you find a school of meditation that you like. Energy work, find the thing that works for you. And like I said, it doesn't have to be visualizations. There's plenty of ways to explore this as physical sensations, or just knowing something. Any exercise you ever encounter in a book, especially, pagan and occult books, you're going to see a lot of visual language. It doesn't, if you're one of those people who can't visualize, you don't have to be, you don't feel pushed out by that. You can transform all of that with language that makes sense to you. Transform any of those to a way that you understand it, you comprehend it, and you can experience it. And physical warding of your space. Whatever whatever practice you're into, whatever symbols are holy or sacred to you, calling on whatever spirits you may want involved in that, gods, goddesses, ancestors, get into essential oils, incenses. There's a whole lot of stuff that is just waiting for you to play with. And no shortage of books that are going to, and websites that are going to tell you what's good for protection. So utilize the resources that are available to you. Find what resonates with you, what interests you, what makes you feel curious and excited, and use those things in your practice for the intention of protection, because all of that comes back to you to make you feel more calm, more centered, more safe, more protected. That's it.
Right on, that makes sense. Well, thank you so much for being willing to share your thoughts about all this today. And yeah, I think there's a lot of like good stuff there, a lot of like fun, useful, magical tidbits. So I really appreciate it. Connie, is there anything else you want to mention? I know that I'm hoping you can let people know where they can find your work and all the rest of it, but is there any final thoughts that you would like to leave the listeners and I with?
I mean, a final thought on this sort of topic, I would say, you know, do all the work to know yourself. Do the work to make yourself feel better. Be kinder to yourself and others. But at the same time, like, look out for others. A lot of this has been very centered on ourselves, right? I think it's important to find the others that you can resonate with and just generally look out for each other. I don't mean you have to get in a circle with a bunch of people that you don't know or trust or particularly like, or go to a public ritual with a bunch of druids or heathens, or join the OTO or the local Masons or whatever there happens to be. But I do think it's a good idea to be more aware of each other locally. To the best that you can, just use common sense, be safety and consent matters. Don't get too involved with problematic groups just because you find a bunch of pagans and think that'll help. But we're in a time when protection is going to be more important. Looking out for each other is more important. And just being aware of each other in your local sphere, I think, is going to become more and more important. That would be my final thought on this kind of subject. But other than that, you can find my show at weirdwebradio.com. If you want to get a lot of the bonus material, please come join my Patreon at weirdwebradio.com. Click join the membership or go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio. And yeah, that's it. That's me.
Yeah, and listeners can find all kinds of interviews with guests, such as myself, actually. I've been
Yourself.
on there. So yes, people can find our conversation there. And check out your stuff on Patreon, and you've got a website where you've got some writing and stuff too, right?
I've got a blog at Weird Web Radio on the main site. There's a blog on there where I've done some writing. And, if you're interested in like chaos heathenism, I was part of an anthology called El Hazablaze. It's a compendium of chaos heathenry. It's been out for about 5 or 6 years now. It's a cool new approach to heathenry. And yeah, that's generally where I would say people should find me, is just my show.
Oh, yeah.
Everything I do is going to be offered through that website one way or another.
Yeah. Well, Lonnie, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me once again.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun. Any chance I get to talk to you, I enjoy it.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Foxtrot 3, Romeo 2, 4, Yankee, Romeo 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec.
All right, thanks so much to Lonnie Scott for joining me. Check out the Weird Web Radio podcast wherever you listen to pods. That is hard to say, Lonnie's right. And find links in the show description for all of the stuff that we talked about today. I really appreciated Lonnie's perspective about a lot of his protection work being sort of related to cultivating relationships with his allies, his own team unseen, as I like to call them. There's a lot to be said for having some type of regular practice regarding protection and or cleansing. This is a theme that came up with so many of our panelists. Much of what we do in a magical practice, or in many other places, even like in the garden or in the gym, or learning to play a musical instrument or mastering a martial art or whatever, a lot of this is about cultivation. You wouldn't go out and put a seed in the ground in your garden and water it and come out the next day and find it, the same unsprouted and declare that the seed, it didn't work. And you need to go back and check it again and maybe like water it here and there if it's dry. Make sure it's the proper temperature for sprouting before you expect that to happen. Again and again. A little bit every day. Not a lot of effort per se, but enough attention to keep an eye on things, to stay connected, to use the part of your mind that you're using when you do that type of work, and to cultivate that part of your mind along with the seed in the garden. There's some outlooks out there that would have you believe that it's, more like wandering through an orchard that maybe belongs to somebody else, with fruit already growing everywhere that you can just pick and eat. Instant gratification, no need to worry about doing any hard work or cultivating one's own garden and one's own mind and all that. Why not eat the fruit you find, even if it might, belong to somebody else, the person or people who cultivated it for themselves? After all, won't it be just as nourishing for you as it is for them? Well, possibly. But without proper background and context, how are you going to know if what you're eating is even regarded as fruit at all? It might be like a seed pod or something. How would you be able to tell the poison berries from the edible ones? How would you know which things need to be cooked first to be safe, or prepared in some other manner? This is one pitfall regarding chaos magic or eclectic witchcraft or things in that vein. If we're not cognizant of what we're doing, there's a possibility we might end up being extractive or appropriative or just, clumsy and stupid when it comes to exploring magical or spiritual paradigms or building our own from various existing ones. Without spending enough time to get the proper context you need to be able to tell the poison berries from the edible ones, there's a chance that you'd only end up fucking yourself up with what you found by using it improperly. Not to mention, showing your ass as a person who can't be bothered to do things properly when it comes to magic or whatever. There seems to be some sort of notion regarding chaos magic out there that it's an easy thing that anybody can do, which in some ways is true if you're talking about mastering the basic techniques of magic. I assert that this is a very accessible thing that could likely be taught to any child, although I would definitely not advocate doing so. The difficult part comes in understanding enough of the broader picture to be able to use what you've learned in a way that's most advantageous and helpful to you. I'll come back to this in a couple minutes during final thoughts, but my main point for now is that if you want to get into chaos magic or eclectic witchcraft or whatever, I wouldn't necessarily expect too much instant gratification, and I would probably recommend getting ready to likely work pretty hard at, understanding various paradigms, or maybe doing some work deconditioning yourself from some of the bullshit we've all been force-fed by culture, things like that. And this probably goes for any magical or spiritual path. Get ready to earn what you learn. In the age of information, there's all manner of books about magic and occultism and esotericism, all kinds of stuff available. What makes these things occulted, though, or hidden, is that you have to actually go and do the praxis to have the experience in order to understand some of the context of what's talked about. Good touchstone here is that you can read all the books you want about sex, but having it is something different than that. I'm going to back myself away from the ledge here before I get further into this little tangent with thoughts about magic and qualia, and instead give you some updates about the little project which has brought me and all of the panelists from our magic and mental health discussion series together. The Green Mushroom Project is an ongoing group magical working based on the metaphor of the relationship that some fungi share with some plants. In a nutshell, if we, the magical practitioners of the project, are like a forest of trees, the green mushroom magical current connects us and strengthens us in unseen ways. In addition to the mycelial web which connects us, there are the mushroom spores, which are like little packets of the current's energy, which can be applied to situations as needed by any participant. The Green Mushroom Project's newest experiment, Void House, is about investigating the healing and alchemical properties of consent, providing consent education to magically inclined people, and organizing consent-centered magical spaces for group work, both in person and online. There's lots of fun and free activities going on the Green Machine Discord server, which is the home of the Green Machine Hive Sigil Project and Void House. You can join us for our weekly Fungal Friday chats, as well as special events like ceremonies and seasonal celebrations. There are also several educational opportunities available. You can check out some of those on the Lux Occult YouTube channel. And shout out to Dave Audrey for the planetary sphere initiation guided meditations we've been doing recently, led by him. It's been such a cool thing to return to them after a few years to see how things hit differently, at least for me, and what's remained the same. It's also been really rad to introduce some new people to working with the classical planets of the ancients, and there are several of these scheduled for different planets coming up this month, so check out those on the Discord server. Thanks also to Barracuda, who will be hosting a special presentation about digital security coming up on Friday the 13th via Zoom. I'll read the description that he's written here. Data security and privacy for Mag activists. Ah, sweet entropy. Tired of leaving your digital breadcrumbs for the man and his spooky machine gods to follow? Welcome, fellow Mag activists, to a potentially radical unlearning, a deliberate rewiring of habit and impulse, where encrypted messages serve as runes and every privacy tweak is a tiny act of rebellion against the surveillance spell. Come help ourselves conjure shields and scrambles from prying eyes and turn paranoia into power, with style, not panic. Privacy is your right to dance unseen in the digital shadows. In this session, you'll learn to wield risk assessment like a divination tool, practice harm reduction as a sacred art, fortify personal and collective spheres, secure your data and devices like a modern-day alchemist, encrypt your signals so that even eavesdropping imps get lost, know how thine vehicle is subjected to surveillance sorcery, and more. Come armed with curiosity, a pinch of skepticism, maybe some duct tape, and the defiant joy of staying one step ahead of the machine. Reality is consensus, but security, that's a spell you cast daily. Fuck yeah, well this is certainly the most exciting digital security workshop I've heard advertised, so I'm quite excited about attending it on the 13th of February. We're also going to be recording that for folks who can't make the scheduled time, and big thanks to Barracuda for putting that together for us. We've also got some other stuff planned, including a community protection salt thing that I'm working on writing up. We did a little test run of it the other night, and it went pretty well. I'm putting some final polishing touches on it now. This is something that people can conduct on their own or with friends to create protection salt. So hoping to have that ready soon. Keep an eye out for that. As always, much love and much love to everybody participating in the Green Mushroom Project, regardless of what that looks like for you in your practice. It's been such an honor and such a privilege to be sharing this journey with you all. You can get me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or on Blue Sky at luxestrada919 for a link to the Discord server. And if you like the show and you like what we've got going on over here, you can support it on Patreon, which will entitle you to receive a bibliomancy reading from me. I do this over email. Making this show is, of course, a pretty wild amount of work, especially for just one intrepid podcaster, but it means so much to me to be able to make it. Fuck yeah. And thank you so much to everybody who is making it possible by giving on Patreon or buy me a coffee, and to all the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word. Tell all of your friends, allies, frenemies, and magical associates about it, as well as everybody you meet at the next PTA meeting, bake sale, anarchist coffee clutch collective, or ceremonial potluck, or other event you attend. You can also post about it on social media or write a positive review where that is a thing, and all of this stuff is super, super helpful, so thank you so much to everybody who is making this possible. And you can also smash the fucking shit out of that follow button or alarm thing or whatever it is on whatever thing you're using to experience this show with, so you can get alerts when new episodes come out. Alright, fuck yeah. Some final thoughts to offer here is that one of the most common types of questions people who are new to magic seem to ask is related to applying the techniques of magic to their own life. They may say something like, sure, I know how to do all these different types of, spell work or whatever, or divination, but beyond these very basic things, what should I be doing with these tools? How should I best use them in my life? And obviously these are very valid questions that will have different answers for every person. One sort of open secret about magic, though, is that it's fairly easy to grasp the main principles and gain some level of technical proficiency. A lot of magic is super intuitive and super accessible. The more complicated part comes with learning to recognize what the game board you're playing on looks like, so you can make the best moves for yourself using whatever tools you have available, magic being one of them. This understanding can be about big-scale stuff, like trying to grasp the game board of physical reality by studying physics, ecology, math, natural sciences, and stuff like that. This could mean understanding the social game board that humans play with each other by learning about history and political philosophy and psychology, things of that nature. It could be about understanding the game board of a paradigm by educating oneself on the mythology and traditions associated with it. It could also be a thing on a smaller scale, like getting enough information to understand the context of a situation you're entering into. Or understanding the game board of your own mind by examining your thoughts and biases and cognitive distortions to get a more clear picture of everything that you're learning and analyzing with that mind. A lot of this type of work is qualified as being solar in some ways of thinking about it, or yellow magic. And I think that there is something to be said for this idea of looking at these cognitive distortions and this being a way to get a clearer and clearer picture of reality as you get more proficient at challenging whatever cognitive distortions might come up in the mind. The notion that it's much more difficult to get good at navigating boundaries and consent and things like that, and to conduct oneself with emotional maturity and all the rest of it than it is to learn magic and get pretty good at it, is not a new one. There are a lot of, teachers and writers about magic out there in present day and in the past who sort of recommend that people go through some type of therapy or adjacent thing before setting out on their magical journeys. And this obviously isn't always possible. This is not the way that things ended up shaking out for me, but if it would have, I do believe it would have given me many advantages and made my life much easier and more chill. And this all comes back to just understanding that game board that you're playing on so that you could navigate it more effectively. And so to this point, I've decided to leave you all with the short list from a much longer list of cognitive distortions, which I've selected from an article called 50 Cognitive Distortions, a giant list of ubiquitous cognitive distortions by Dr. Alice Boyles. So it's been noted by some of the people that study this stuff that there seems to be a sort of like negativity bias built into the human brain, which is probably adaptive, and that's like a whole nother conversation for another time. But just remembering that there's this sort of like implicit negativity bias, I think, is sometimes helpful when we go to look at the unhelpful ways that the brain sometimes cuts corners and creates these distortions. Some context, this is still me. Brains are assholes, but luckily there are patterns to the way that they tend to like distort things and cut corners and shit like that. And we can look for these in our thinking patterns. So I'll read some of these from the list for you all here. These are some ones that I've selected because they're ones that I recognize come up a lot for myself. And I suppose I should not be surprised by that, given that they were from a list which was qualified as things being ubiquitous. So I assume that these will be things that many of us can relate to. Okay, so personalizing. An example is taking something personally that may not be personal, seeing events as consequences of your actions when there are other possibilities. For example, believing someone's brusque tone must be because they are irritated with you. Another one, mind reading, guessing what someone else is thinking when they might not be thinking that. Another, belief in a just world. For example, believing that poor people must deserve to be poor. Recognizing feelings as causes of behavior, but not equally attending to how behavior influences thoughts and feelings. So an example here is you think, when I have more energy, I'll exercise, but not exercising will give me more energy. All right, another cognitive distortion is biased implicit attitudes. So psychologists use a test called the implicit association test to measure attitudes that people subconsciously hold. Results show that people subconsciously associate things like fat with lazy, for instance, which is actually super fucked up and not true. But anyway, it's useful to be mindful that you might be subconsciously holding these biased attitudes, and then you can consciously challenge them when they come up. The belief that you can multitask is apparently a cognitive distortion, which is a little bit of news to me, but there you have it. When you're multitasking, you're actually just task and attention shifting. Trying to focus on more than one goal at a time is self-sabotage. Okay, and the last one that I've listed here, because I think this is an important one to return to, failure to recognize the cognitive benefits of restorative activities and those that increase positive emotions. So, for example, seeing humor or breaks as a waste of time. All right, so thanks to Dr. Alice Boyles for that list of ubiquitous cognitive distortions, which you can check out in the show description and find out which ones your brain might be doing right now. And also remember that last one, seeing breaks or humor as a waste of time. It comes up a lot for me. But we need breaks sometimes to create the space in which to grow, to create the silence that we need to fantasize about a better future so that we can help to create it. Fantasize about a better world so that we can help to build it. We need that space and that time and that rest. And when there's pressure pushing against our boundaries not to take that for ourselves, it is an act of resilience and resistance to hold that sacred space for ourselves. So remember, whatever it looks like for you in these trying times, I will, sharing the Green Mushroom Project statement of resistance, remind you to resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Catalyst and Lonnie Scott for joining me for today's episode, and thanks so much to all of the panelists who have been on the series. Fuck yeah. Check out the show description to find links to the stuff that we talked about here today. Gratitude to Hecate, the Void, and all of Team Unseen. Thanks so much for the kind support for the show and for my other work. Gratitude. And most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. Much love. Much love also to everybody resisting the absurd federal overreach, which has already caused so much violence in Minneapolis and elsewhere. Fuck ICE and fuck these goddamn fascists. Resist. Even in dark times, there are many bright lights. So shine on, friends. This is Lux Estrada reminding you to stay strong, guard your mind, and stay fucking curious. Hey, what's up? I'm Luxa.
And I'm Josh. Are you looking for a chill place to hang out online and chat about chaos magic, occultism, witchcraft, and more? Are you hoping to learn and share your knowledge and experience in a place that is welcoming to folks of all different backgrounds and identities?
If so, check out the Green Machine Discord server, home of the Green Mushroom Project. Our growing community of chaotes, occultists, sorcerers, witches, and weirdos has all kinds of fun and interesting things going on. From chats and rituals to workshops, clubs, and more. There's a lot of cool opportunities to get involved.
Sounds great, Luxa. How can folks find us?
Well, for now, we're keeping things pretty small as we grow, so we're not advertising on any of the Discord services that do that. But folks can hit me up and I will send them a link. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod.
Fuck yeah!
Fuck yeah.
Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.